I've forgotten all about it. But I mean, it was nuts, right? Because he was saying like, this person was literally wanting this miniature to perform a ritual in real world because he believed that it was going to destroy the world. It was going to come to life in the Arctic and attack the world. This guy was certifiable. Yes, clearly, some people were nuts that played Dungeons and Dragons, and that's true. But yeah, whenever we met him, that was what we said. Was like, do you remember us? Or do you remember me? I'm the guy about... And he literally just went... The look on his face was amazing. It was amazing. And, I mean, after that, we didn't really get to talk much, but that was the one time that we did actually meet face-to-face. So, there you go. Confirmed. Wrecked. So, we played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for the most part. And eventually we moved on to 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons, which came out with the player's options, which opened up the gaming face. But we're still using THAC0 at this point, and if you're an old school D&D player, THAC0 is a thing that you guys will remember. You think math is hard now in D&D? Figure out THAC0. It used a minus system. Negatives. You actually had to calculate pluses and negatives as well. After 2nd edition, we went on to 3rd, and very quickly a revision of 3rd called 3.5, which was Wizards' first version of the game. And that's the one we're actually currently using on Howreroll for the current story that we're doing. Then after that, they moved on briefly to 4th edition. Now, without going into the what, where's, and why for, 4th edition was probably the most popularly received version of Dungeons & Dragons ever. But when they did release 4th, they also opened up the license for the Roll20 license and made it in public domain, in which case Paizo brought out Pathfinder, which arguably you can call 3.75. A lot of players didn't like the fact that they'd stopped supporting 3.5 so quickly and moved on to 4th. So Paizo brought out Pathfinder using the exact same rule system as 3.5, polished it up a little bit, and then started to support it, and have continued to do so, and it is still being heavily supported today. And then, of course, from then we went to the current version, which is 5e, 5th edition, which to some degree I think has suffered a little bit from some of the things that MMOs have. There's a lot of simplification come. One thing great about 5th edition is it's a lot easier to learn than any of the previous editions. It's very quick to get into, but that being said, there are some of the game mechanics that, as a dungeon master, leave you forcing yourself to do some things that you wouldn't want to do. In particular, dealing with like the rest mechanic and stuff like that. And these are the reasons why we play 3.5 currently for the story. But going back to, let's go back to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because this is where we really put some hours in. We played Monday through Friday from about 6 PM to midnight every day, and then usually on a Saturday and a Sunday from noon to 10, 11, 12 o'clock on a Sunday, and God knows when on a Saturday. So if you consider on an average week, we put in 60 hours, and we played for how many years?
Oh.
I don't think it would be unfair to say that we probably spent more time looking at each other. In fact, as I told chat the other day, significant others, it was a requirement that your significant others played, because if they didn't, you didn't ever see them. Caroline, which your fiance and ultimately your wife at the time, she played, and she had to, because if she didn't, you would not exist to her.
No.
So I think the number of hours, I mean, if I was to say that we probably spent 3,000 to 4,000 hours around a gaming table looking at each other's sorry faces, I don't think that would be unrealistic.
That's probably a conservative guess.
Conservative guess, right, exactly. So let's talk, let's specifically talk about the experiences we had playing Dungeons and Dragons. some of the things that we did, obviously, because we played for so long, we run, at the time, if it was published, we ran it. What was your favourite adventure that we played, published adventure that we ever played, do you think, from D&D?
I think purely for how much we struggled to get it would be FRC 2 Curse of the Azure Bonds.
FRC 2, yep. Curse of the Azure Bonds. That was, I think both me and you, we bought 2 copies each, didn't we? One we left in the cellophane, never to be opened, and one to play.
I still have them.
You still have them.
I still have them in the cellophane.
There you go. It's got to be worth money now. But that was a truly awesome adventure, and it was actually partly some of the things in Azure Bonds was some of my inspiration that I took for Marks of Intrigue campaign, the first campaign that Howreroll run. And I think that adventure alone took us what, a year to run?
A year to 18 months, I would say, yeah.
That was, you know, a truly unbelievable module, because it was so non-linear that it was it was a published campaign. It wasn't an adventure. It was a public, you know, a full campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. But even back then, a lot of the development of your own campaigns was happening, and so much fun. It's so much fun, and I think looking back then, because we really loved role playing,
right?
And so it wasn't about the stats. It really wasn't about the stats, and it wasn't about min-maxing or racing to the higher level, or getting this, and I want to be the best I can with that sword, and I'm going to take that stat because it will. It wasn't about min-maxing. It was about the character development. And I know you and I both had characters that we played that had quirks, but that's what made them them.
Yeah. And when we're talking about quirks, we're talking about at the time of rolling up the character, we decided we wanted a quirk or something about the character. So I rolled up a rogue with one arm. It didn't lose an arm through gameplay. It was made with one arm. Its stats weren't good. It honestly, as an actual rogue, it sucked. He was terrible. He was a terrible rogue. He was more of a one-arm beggar than a rogue. But the fun he was to roleplay was phenomenal. And this is the thing. We talk about min-maxing a lot. When you try to win Dungeons and Dragons by creating the toughest, most powerful character you can,
yeah,
you lose something. You lose something so much more valuable. You actually lose the enjoyment of role-playing the character. And I think today it's very difficult to look at people and say, you should make your character terrible, make it crap.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to do that. They all want their characters to be badasses. Well,
yep,
that's fine. Your first few characters that you ever played, we all did. The first character I ever played was a paladin called Orin Neville Smythe. I totally ripped the name off from Flight of Dragons, the cartoon movie, which we also adapted into an adventure. Remember that?
Yeah, which I loved. Absolutely.
We took the entire script of the movie Flight of Dragons by Peter Dickinson and turned it into a D&D adventure, and that was an awful lot of fun.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, we got past the desire to have stats and be bad. We wanted the role-playing opportunity. We wanted the chance to truly bring a character to life. And
absolutely.
This is one of the things, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, because chat will know I've been saying this leading up to this. Terrasmar is one of the best D&D players I've ever had the fortune to play with, and this is why. Because he doesn't care about numbers. He doesn't care about statistics. He only cares about the personality and the development of the character he plays. Even when he had a ridiculously badass character, Thal the Barbarian, he never used it that way. So Thal was... We used to use the system, the old dice system. The same system I still use today with 3.5 is you roll 4d6, drop the lowest, and you do it 6 times, and there's your stats. You are totally at fate's mercy. All your stats are going to be between 3 and 18. And back in the day, if you got an 18 on strength, you rolled a percentage dice to add to the 18. So you could have like 18/64. And because 18 was considered like the top echelon of stats at the time. And then if you had anything above that, it was fractional because it wasn't whole numbers. So sitting around a table, and in the same way that we did it with Howreroll, all the players are sitting there witnessing the dice rolls. So there's nobody's fudging. We weren't letting characters bring their own characters to the table. They rolled the characters right then and there. So Tarasmar roll in his stats. He rolls a natural. He rolls 3 6s, so he's got an 18 for his strength, and then he rolls the percentage dice and rolls 100. This happened in one game session. So Thal had an 18/00 strength, which was just about... I mean, this was Conan. It was dumb as a brick, but he actually wasn't that dumb. He was not stupid, but he wasn't intelligent. Let's just say that. But he had rage issues. Now,
yeah, you can.
Imagine this. So we all know Piper, the character Piper that Bane played, used to use her big two-handed sword, and she could cleave, and she could power attack and stuff like that from the last campaign, and do incredible amounts of damage. Now imagine if when Piper got mad, if her sword wasn't drawn, she didn't bother with it. Brought it in her hands. I'm too pissed off to think about drawing a weapon. I just want to tear you to pieces with my bare hands. That's what Thal used to do. So when the barbarian got enraged, if he did not have his, at the time I think, a +3 battle axe, if it wasn't in his hand, he didn't care. He just charged in and started punching whatever it was. Many times to his own detriment. But that's what he would have done, because he wasn't rationally thinking about, oh, I need to draw my axe and attack this thing. It was, and went in hands first.
He would have gone straight in.
And that was one of those things. So even with a high-powered character, it wasn't used. It wasn't something that was abused in the fact that it's like, oh, well, I've got this amazing stat, so I'm going to min-max out everything I can and be the most powerful warrior the land's ever seen. He never wore a stitch of armor. You know, it's...
He was fairly simple. I mean, certainly the way I used to play him, he wasn't dumb, but he wasn't the most intelligent.
Right.
So he had a fighting intuition. He had his street smarts, but yeah, he could be taken advantage of. I mean, certainly his mathematics and counting up the share of the group loot wasn't good.
Right. I mean, I remember, was it Gareth? What did Gareth play? But he had a 4. One of his stats was a 4.
Yes.
And so he rolled the dice, which meant he rolled 2 1s and a 2. That was the best he got. And he took it and embraced it. And we loved that character. And that's the thing, is there's too much of this desire to have good stats. I think what it comes down to is, and there's nothing wrong with it, don't get us wrong, we're not saying that it's bad to have a good character. These are reasons I don't like the point share system. I don't want every character to be a carbon copy of itself. I don't want every character to follow a MMO type architecture to where it's, I'm going to have this strength, this constitution, this dexterity, I'm going to take these abilities in this order, and by the time I get to level 20, this is my build. Pardon my French, but fuck builds. You should not be worrying about where your character is going other than where it is. That's one of the things I like about Howreroll is a lot of the times the skill points they spend them based on things that have happened to their character, and it justifiably makes sense. And they try to do things that do that. Because if you don't allow your character to grow through its experiences, it's not real. People go through life. You can have ambition, don't get us wrong. You can say, I want my character to try to achieve these things. But if those things don't ever naturally come across, if you ignore all pursuits that you have in an avenue of trying to get where you want to be, as opposed to where you are and where you could be, you give up so much of that character. You lose all those opportunities to develop a real person, a real character, because the experiences you're letting them go by like they didn't matter.
Absolutely, and I think I feel very proud of the fact that our group, they weren't cookie cutter characters. Right. If you saw a group of level 15 characters and there was the paladin and there was the warrior, you could, if you were min-max, you could groups. This is how they're all going to be using that same weapon, that same armor. And it very much followed into MMOs, because every character that reached a high level would look the same. They would have the same stats.
Thank heavens for transmogrification and all that stuff, because without it, everyone would look identical.
Absolutely, but the advantage of pen and paper is you actually had a player behind it and that could bring out character to that on the tabletop. And I feel very proud of the groups that we had a group of 5, 6 or 14 characters in that group that were very different, and they were the sum of their experiences.
Right. And that's right. I mean, the things, how they developed was based on the story. In fact, we used to do things where I literally at one point I would say, if your character has not had the opportunity to do this, you can't advance it.
Yep.
If at no point during this level you did this skill, I'm not letting you increase it. Spend the points somewhere else.
Yep.
Or sit on the points. Sit on them if you want to, I don't care, but you're not spending. So, like sneak. If your character never sneaked once during the adventure, and you went from level 7 to 8 without sneaking one time, I used to say, no, you're not putting any points in sneak. What have you learned? You haven't learned anything. You haven't developed that skill. So all the characters, the skills, basically... So what did that do? Well, it made characters do what it was they wanted to do. So if you want your rogue to sneak, and you want your rogue to hide, therefore, to get better at it, you must do what? Sneak and hide. If you didn't do it, you didn't get better at it. But by doing things like that, it made the players embrace the skills that they were supposed to and do their job.
Absolutely.
Everybody did what they were meant to do. And, you know, it would be like a warrior. He's got longsword proficiency and weapon specialization longsword, and he's proficient with a longbow. And then he says, I want to increase that to weapon specialization longbow. No. Well, why not? Because you haven't shot a single arrow. It's sat on your back the entire time for 5 levels. You've never used it. Unless you can give me a justifiable reason how you've gotten better, then they would say, okay, I understand. That makes perfect sense. So, can we take 2 weeks of downtime between adventures during which my character is going to practice archery? Yes. Yes, you can. And at the end of those 2 weeks, I have no problem with you developing that skill at this point. And we did that. And so we forced people as players to develop a character through the experiences of what they played, as opposed to picking from a damn chart. Oh, this looks like a good ability. I'll have this one next. Why? It doesn't make sense for your character to have that. Oh, but you know, it's what? It's min-maxing. It's the most... It will mean I can do the most damage. And I have to... This is the other one. I have to take this skill before I can take this one. And then I have to take this one before I can ultimately get this one.
Yeah.
So you're taking... You're spending the next 7 levels of feats on this path, and you've decided that back at level 3, and you're going to do that. You know what? If your goal is to become a master swordsman with a 2-handed sword, and you want to do that, I have no problem with it. but I expect you to be using that two-handed sword almost exclusively and training with it and fighting with it at every opportunity. And
Absolutely.
That's how it should be.
And I think that the way that we did our skills back then, that it was based on experience and based on what was used and usable for the party. What was the best use to maximise your resources?
Right.
Because if you've got a rogue, and I've played many, that I would want to hide in shadows, I would want to sneak, I would want to use all of those skills so that the wizards and the clerics can hold back their spells for when they need them.
Right.
I would then be off, and there would be a trust that whether it was a backstab or whatever it is, whether it's a trip, something would happen that would be an advantage to the group. And often we would take skills that would be probably less of an individual gain, but for the party, it would certainly be useful and beneficial. And we would often take, very unselfishly, skills that we are using on a regular basis for the betterment of the group.
Right. And that's right. And we was like yesterday in chat, people were asking us stuff about evil players inside of groups, and how does that work? And of course, there's half the people saying, "Oh, you can't have an evil character inside a group of good people. It just doesn't work." This, that, and the other. And I'm saying, I disagree. And again, going back to the blog, if you read the one with the player plant, Tarazmar was part of that game.
Yep.
And when Nick joined the group, he was no different player than anybody else. He rolled up a cleric that you all believe was a lawful...
No.
It was a lawful neutral cleric of some pleasant religion. He wore the garb. Truth is, the entire time he was a lawful evil cleric of a despicable religion, and he played the players as well as their characters for 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, when the character finally turned on you guys, I mean, did you honestly have any indication that that was coming?
No clue. I can honestly say that's probably the biggest genuine shock I ever had playing any game, because it's a player that you've known for 6 months. He's role played his character, as far as we're concerned, perfectly. We have no clue that anything is untoward.
Right.
And so, wow. Yeah.
I mean, because here's the thing. Now, you could have known that as players, which meant your characters would have had to ignore it. Mm-hmm. But the problem is, choosing not to metagame is a necessity. Mm-hmm. Not knowing, therefore never having to worry about meta, is phenomenal.
Yep.
So the fact that you guys as players didn't know it made it so real. It meant nobody artificially was casting Detect Alignment on him for some bull crap reason. It meant nobody was deliberately watching his character to see if he did anything evil. Because everyone assumed he was good. So they assumed there was no reason to do it all. So the metagame wasn't even an issue, just because you didn't know to meta.
It was perfectly done. The fact that we didn't know made it all the more shocking when he turned. And I don't know, I can't even remember the look on our faces, but it was genuine shock.
Right. Did the DM know the cleric was it? Yes. Read the article on the DM blog, but basically what happened was Nick had come to me. I'd started this new group, and it was at a gaming club, and he said, look, I really want to play with you guys, but I'm going to be moving in 6 months, so I can't commit long term. So I said to Nick, I was like, okay, this is perfect. You're going to play a villain inside the party. Do not tell them. They're not going to know. So we're going to play it off. You're going to be a lawful neutral cleric, you know, just as you want to be. You're going to play the evil character you want to play, but the players are not going to know. Don't tell them. And that's literally what we did. And he was working for the main villain the entire adventure, the entire game, 6-month campaign. He was working for the bad guy. Inside the player's group, he was the plant. And that's why the article is actually called The One with the Player Plant. So again, it was phenomenal because there was no meta. There was no metagaming required because nobody knew. And again, at the end of that, when he finally came out and said, I stabbed so-and-so, they were like, what?
And you truly felt betrayed.
Right, I mean, they literally did. It was like we actually almost had to have a counseling session afterwards to make sure everybody didn't hate Nick in real life. Because everyone was so mad. It was like, you bastard! I mean, it was like so upset. All the people were genuinely upset that this had happened. And player characters died. I mean, good characters were killed by Nick. And at the end of it, it was like, okay, guys, you understand this is all part of the game, right? This was architecturally designed from day one. Don't hate this dude. Don't be mad at Nick for doing a great job. And I think that was the thing, is after everybody got over the shock, it was like the movie from any 80s, it was like that in a movie, any 80s movie like 16 Candles, at some point someone gets past the emotional shock and they look at the guy and go,
yeah, absolutely. And I think when we got over the shock and the anger, there was that genuine appreciation, not of just Nick, but of you as well, and the work that had gone in there jointly, putting that together.
Right.
Because we benefited from that. We benefited from the storytelling, and from that genuine shock and betrayal. None of that would have been possible, and it certainly wouldn't have carried the same gravitas if we'd have been metagaming.
Right. Exactly.
It was genuine.
And I think that's the thing, and that comes exactly back to, okay, some people's characters died, but this is when you have to understand the difference between, and I'm going to be very careful how I say this because I don't want to offend anybody. I'm probably going to, but I don't want to. The difference between a new player and an experienced player is time. Okay? A new player starts playing Dungeons & Dragons, there's a lot of things he doesn't know, there's a lot of things he's not aware of, and he makes a lot of common mistakes. Including how he plays his character and his shallow roleplay. I'll call it shallow, because he's not thinking on deep levels. It's all surface roleplay. And then as they gain experience playing, they have the opportunity to develop that and become a better player. And you do that over years. The same way as becoming a dungeon master. Everybody seems to think that the second they start dungeon mastering that they're going to be the greatest thing ever. It's foolish. It takes time. You develop skills over time. And to think that you're God's gift to DMing because you've done it for a year, it's just like anything you do in real life. If you look at yourself as a person and say, I am not the same person as I was when I was 5, as I was when I was 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, go on and on and on. And it's the same as a dungeon master. I look back and think, God, I was a moron when I first started DMing. Some of the crap I would come up with, the stupid zoo dungeons I would put together that never made sense. And the things that I would do that nowadays I cringe at, because now I have an understanding to look at things on a much deeper level. And as a player playing for all that time, you also do. So there's a huge difference between new and experienced players. There is also a huge difference between good and bad players. And not necessarily. I have known some people that have played Dungeons & Dragons for over a decade, and they are terrible players. They are terrible players. They metagame at every opportunity. Everything they do is concentrating on the sole development of their character. They don't think of the group. They're very selfish in it. They lose the entire concept of what the game is. And I think the challenge for any player, to me, if I'm gonna DM for you, I care less whether you know the rules and more if I can believe what your character is. If I don't believe your character, that's a shame. Your job as a player is to sell me, and on How We Roll, to sell everybody watching. You haven't got to just sell me. Around a physical tabletop, a player's got to sell the other players and the DM. On How We Roll, you have to sell chat. You have to sell a couple of hundred people watching you play this game. And I think that is one of the things that you have to look at and get on a deep, deep level. In order to develop a personality for a character, you can't do it in a paragraph. You can't write down... if you have an event that happens to your character, you have to be willing to carry that event out. I'll give you guys a prime example. And this is one of the things I really liked on How We Roll with Radovan, the cleric. Radovan, due to his past, was initially a borderline alcoholic. Through gameplay and circumstances, he became an alcoholic. Then things started to become problematic for him. He role-played temper issues. He role-played how his character behaved when he didn't have alcohol. We physically introduced negatives and minuses to represent him going through the DTs, and he role-played through that. And then when he decided eventually to become sober, he didn't one day say, oh, my character doesn't drink anymore. He role-played getting sober. And in doing so, it took a number of adventures, and slowly but surely, to start with, every time he got around hardcore drinking, he had to make willpower checks to not fall off the wagon. And eventually, after long enough, he did. But he didn't just say, my character's a drunk. Why is it a drunk? It likes to drink. His backstory gave you a viable and believable reason. This is why he drank. This is why he turned to drink. The experiences that he went through led him to not want to lay it up until such a time that he realized, I can't do this anymore. This is detrimental. And he chose not to. And even now, an entirely new campaign later, we still see Radovan struggle with alcohol. That's depth. That's what I'm looking for in a player.
That's depth to the character.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is. It's not... That's what I'm talking about developing below the surface.
Yeah, absolutely, because you can create superficial character traits.
Yeah.
But when you're actually getting into the character, because it can resonate, because later on you could be in a scenario where maybe there are some dwarves and they're having a drinking game, and they will feel offended if you don't take part.
Right.
And they're offering you up the flagons, and you drink this flagon, and you're not going to want to because of all of those traits. And you've got to role play that out.
Right.
But it gives you that depth that would not exist if Radovan hadn't have chosen to go down that path and role play it to that depth. So that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's like the things that I remember, the moments I remember from 34 years of playing Dungeons and Dragons are never what the character's stats were, never who killed what, never what dice rolls were made around the table. The things that last, the things that I look back on and think, man, those were good times, those were awesome moments, are the memorable roleplay.
Yes.
And beyond memorable, believable. When characters, like, there's a point where I'm always telling everybody, never allow your emotions as a player to interact and dictate the emotions of a character. They're two different things. Your character has to have his own set of emotions. That doesn't mean you can't use your player emotions to enhance what a character is already feeling. When Veslar died, Racer was heartbroken, and Bane on stream broke down. Now, that wasn't crocodile tears, that was real emotion coming out. But it wasn't misplaced emotion, it was an emotion that was used to enhance that moment. And I know that people on chat, or in chat, truly felt that. They truly felt Racer's loss. They truly felt the emotional moment then. That amplified it. And those are the things that chat is going to remember about Howreroll.
Absolutely.
They're going to remember the incidences, some of the fun NPCs and stuff like that, certainly. But they're not going to remember... Oh, remember that time when Piper rolled and hit that guy for 30? They're not going to remember that. Remember that time that this happened, that happened. It's not about the dice rolls. It's not about the powers that the characters have. It's about what they do with them. It's the memory that they bring. And if they can etch that memory into people watching the show, or if you're playing around a tabletop, if you can etch that memory into the other players or your DM to the point where 25 years later he writes a blog and he's writing about those moments because those are the things that he drew from the past. That's what stuck with him. You know.
There are character moments that you cannot forget, like the green flash.
Right.
You know,
the green flash. So speaking of which, I did actually reach out and told Linzafel and the Green Flash that we were doing this tonight. I didn't hear back from Linzafel. I did hear back from the Green Flash, who said if he did not have to be at work at 5 a.m. tomorrow, he would have been here and chat. But that's right. I mean, those characters. The Green Flash was a ranger that, for whatever reason, I don't even remember how it happened, but Gordon, the guy that was playing the character, decided that this guy was going to be D&D's first superhero.
Full of himself.
He was so full of himself. He was the most egotistical, pompous ranger. He dressed in I mean, he wore green like many rangers, but it was Robin Hood Men in Tights green with a cape and a flash symbol on it. I mean, it was so funny. The things that would come out of his mouth. The way he would interact with NPCs, like just grabbing the local bar wench and bending her, wrapping his arm around her waist, dipping her and kissing her in a kind of a Lord Flashheart way. And the reaction of people around him. No one knew how to behave with that. And we're not talking about... in D&D, of course, the players all play heroes. But we're talking about having a superhero persona. It was so weird. But it worked. And it was hilarious.
It really was.
Talking about emotions, when we played the main campaign at one point that had been going on for 2 or 3 years, a girl called Louisa played a female druid called Linzafel. Now, understand that to get to level 13 in AD&D is a lot of work. That's a lot of gameplay. And her level 13 druid was killed.
Yes.
And I remember the moment it happened, everybody around the table, every single player felt terrible. They were like... I mean, the game come to a stop. We stopped playing that night. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It was like a person had died. A member of our family had died. And for the characters, that is exactly what it was. But for the players, it was that way as well. Because the roleplay had been so intense for all these years that every player truly knew each person's character. You knew about their childhood, everything they've been through. I mean, it was... the level of depth, it goes so far beyond what a lot of, and again I will say newer, not going to say good or bad, newer players will have experienced so far, not because of their inability to do so, but because they haven't got the experience necessarily to do so. And it will develop, and as the longer they play. But here's the thing, the characters you will get attached to as players will not be the badass characters. No, they will be the characters that you draw the most emotional connection to.
Absolutely.
And usually the badasses, don't have that. You don't have those moments.
And they also don't have those quirks that humanize them. You have that point where you can relate at some level because they are an adventurer. They are doing all of this, exciting daredevil stuff. But there are traits about them that you can relate to, that humanize them. And I remember when early on, I think one of the biggest struggles I had as a player was as a human player, and I've only ever met human players. It was a struggle at first playing a non-human because I would want to, as a player, put my own human emotions and thoughts forward.
Yes.
And it was only over time when I gained the experience that if I played an elf, I became the elf. If I was a dwarf, I became that dwarf with all of the surliness and the stubbornness or the arrogance of the elf. And I had to leave my human emotions and my human natural instincts behind. And sometimes playing a non-human, you can embody it with those quirks to make it memorable, because it does stand out then as being very, very different.
Right, exactly. So, from a player's perspective, if you are going to play a demi-human, okay, now this is a non-human character that obviously has pluses and advantages over a human in most cases. Usually they have some negatives as well, but there are some pluses and advantages that they get. What do you have any advice for players to get themselves in the concept of, okay, your dwarven warrior is not a human warrior. Your gnome rogue is not a human rogue, and you shouldn't play it as such, even though you yourself are human, and as you've just said, the natural thing is to inject your human emotions and thought processes. Yep. How did you overcome that? How did you get past that?
I think for me, it was trying to read up as much as I can about the culture, about the race, about how they came to be, what their traits were, what their characters were. Read up in lore as to famous individuals of that race, the kind of traits that they would portray.
Right.
A lot of it was research, and to the point where it felt like homework sometimes. That you're doing an awful lot of research, but then when you played that demi-human, you were embodying those traits. So, as the elf, I would feel superior because I am superior.
When you've lived, I mean, that's right. If you're an elf, let's just say a young elf might be 100 years old. You've lived 100 years, which most humans will never do.
Yes.
So even as a young elf, you may not be you might not be smarter than a particular human. You might not be wise than the particular human, especially if you're looking at statistics. But you have life experiences
absolutely
beyond anything they possibly could have had. So you've got to bring that into it, right? How do you role play that outside of your stats?
It's about trying to do research, and if you are that speaking in the late 20s, so there you are playing an elf that's maybe 100, 120 years old. You've been around while that human's great-great-grandfather was around.
Right.
It puts it into context. So when you're talking about things, you can maybe drop in about a different age and do your research, because, and this can come across very patronising and condescending, and you probably do mean it as the elf to put this human in their place. That you won't remember this, but 90 years ago, when your great-grandfather was born, this was happening. I was present then. So, yeah, you can say that I'm not better than you per se, but the life experience that you've been through, even without stats-wise, you not being too superior of your character,
you
that
know,
itself gives that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, smarter, but just from the simple fact that you've lived that long means you have had experiences to draw from. There are things that you know, not because you're more intelligent, but because you've witnessed it.
Yep.
You know, and I think that's one of those things. You've got to realize that if you're going to play a demi-human, it's not human. Your character isn't human, so you can't be human. You've got to, and you hit the nail on the head. The word is research. You get in, or you get out of D&D what you put in. The more work you do on researching how you want to roleplay your character, the more work you put in on developing a character, the more you get out of the game. And I think it's very important for players to ultimately, yes, know the game mechanics for the smooth running of the game. But beyond whether you know the necessary mechanics for this, that, and the other, beyond whether you know that, oh, the invisibility spell is on page 227 of the player's handbook, whatever, which it's not, just saying. But beyond any of that, the thing that you have to realize is it is a role-playing game, and your job is to role-play beyond anything else.
Yes.
If you don't put all your effort in that, you may as it's the same thing as a guy playing poker that purely bets high when he has a good hand, bets low when he has a low hand, and folds when he has crap. And what is he as a poker player? He's terrible. He's a useless. But he might understand. He might look and say, okay, well, I've got this hand. Mathematically, there's a 11% chance that I could get the card that I want. That makes him a very mechanical, a good mechanical poker player. In the same way, there are good mechanical dungeon masters that know the rules inside out. But he's not a good poker player, and never will be, until he understands that there is a concept outside of the mechanics of the game that he must master, which is the emotional thing, and how to bluff, and how to read players. And D&D is the same way. You have to learn those skills. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and if I upset anybody, again, I don't really care at this point. But it's like, some people should not be dungeon masters. Anybody can be. It's not that you can't, but some people just, they won't do the work. They're not interested in doing the work. They don't have the talent for it. Not like it is a great talent to acquire, but some people just can't do it. On the other hand, some people are fantastic players and never want to DM. And I think it's one of those things that you got to know yourself. You've got to be honest with yourself as a person and say, not do I think this, but is this how is this validated by other people? When I've played with people, what are the responses that I get? When I act this way, when I do these things, how do people react? Do we end up with great gaming sessions, or are they subpar and inferior because they were kind of weird and awkward and didn't work? And I see that a lot on Twitch.
Yeah, but absolutely. I've certainly seen that a lot. But I think you touched on it earlier, that when we first started, all those years ago, yeah, there were the zoo dungeons, and we didn't really, only later on when you think about the rationale and the logic of why would that group be in that room next to that group, and wouldn't they have overheard them? Why would they sit there for that long waiting on the off chance that someone would come along? As a player, you very much have to learn that same rationale. Right. Why would this elf be with this group of humans? You can roll up a party from scratch, but why would the elf, the dwarf, the human, and the bastard half-elf actually be together?
Right, what holds that?
You need a backstory. You've really got to put the research in. So the elf may be with the group, but there has to be a rationale and a reason why.
Right.
Because to be with the humans would be so beneath him. And, you know, if there were a bastard half-elf was bad enough, but to be a human, to be hanging around with humans...
Poor racer.
as an elf, that's your view. You are superior. So if you're hanging around with the humans, and heaven forbid you are relying on them, if at some point you have to have them help you, that's awful. It's an awful feeling because that they are so beneath you. And it's only over time, and we've talked about campaigns going on for many years, and it can take that long for the elf to soften enough that he actually trusts, not humans, he trusts this human.
Right. Well, so, and that's right, it's the same with Radovan. Radovan, for his own reasons, hates elves. But he is I mean, he's had this like rocky relationship with Kia and Racer, trusting, not trusting, beginning to trust, losing a little bit of faith. It goes backwards and forwards because I think it's a very fragile relationship that he has with those characters because he doesn't like them inherently, yet he finds himself warming to them individually. But it is a fragile kind of affection because it's so easy for them to do something stereotypically elven and bring back to him a memory of why he doesn't like them in the first place. Yeah. You know, and those are the things that, again, we're talking about role-playing in depth, is getting to a level of depth where you think about your character below the surface.
Yes.
So you're not thinking, my character's going to do this because blah. Okay, why the blah? Yep. You know, my character's going to be a drunk because he's had bad experiences. Okay, fine. What are those bad experiences? Let's draw them out. Let's make them real. Let's make it to where you as a person truly think about that and say, God, if I was that person, I'd turn to drink too. Poor bastard. You know, and I think that's what it comes down to is, are you willing to go that deep? Are you willing to get down to that point? And if you don't, that's okay. You may be perfectly fine not going to that deep. Again, though, I will challenge you that if you are capable of going down to that level, you will get to a point when you're playing your character, when you are role-playing, that you will connect with that character on a different level. Not on a, I'm attached to my character because I've played it for a long time and I don't want anything bad to happen to it level, but because you will start to understand who that person is. And the true wonderment for any player is when his dungeon master or game master, if we're any other game, and the rest of the players understand it too. Yep. When they believe you, when they look at your character and buy all those weird things that have happened to you, and they understand how they happened and what happened. Not, yep. Oh, okay, your character's a drunk. Oh, and that's fine. We understand he's a drunk. There's nothing there for that. No. Be the drunk. Be the drunk. I mean, you know, that's it. You've got to become that. Absolutely. You've got to understand it.
Well, one example I can give is going back to Farm. You know, when I played Ren, he was a barbarian, and again, a barbarian is not a human. A barbarian is a very large.
Yeah, I mean, they're human in theory, but... Hold on a sec, you're breaking up real bad for a second.
It's well separate. Yeah. They may as well be a separate race because their whole culture... Their whole culture is so different because they may as well be a separate race. And with Ren, there was this fear of magic.
Right.
Because barbarians weren't using magic. They were very fearful. They weren't trustful of magic.
Right.
And so he wouldn't have spells cast upon him. He knew that there were casters in the party that would use it, and over time would develop an understanding that would happen and maybe an acceptance to a degree. But he would refuse any spell, even if it was to his detriment.
Which he did a lot.
You're not casting that on me. So they could put, you know, spells of warding or whatever on him, but he would refuse that. And if they'd have ever broken that, he would have lost all trust.
Right.
Because then it comes back to that inherent fear. I knew you were like this. it would come back. I knew this would happen. You're all the same. And it's about keeping the character true to themselves.
Right. And that was the thing. I remember the number of times they were like, look, if you'll just let me cast this spell on you, you're going to be so much harder to hurt. You know, basically we're talking like magic investment or mage armor, trying to give an unarmored barbarian a +4 AC or whatever. No. And if you do it, I'll kill you. You're not casting a spell on me. I don't care what it is. I don't care what it's supposed to do. And the way he would get so enraged if they kept pushing the issue.
Absolutely. And the worst part for Thal was he wouldn't even have them cast any healing spells on him. So he would rather rest naturally and let his own gods take care of him in the way that it was intended to be, as a warrior spirit.
Right.
So they couldn't even heal him up with the magical spells because it would just get him so angry, even the thought of it. And that is to the detriment of the character, but oh so more memorable because of that.
Right, yeah. Someone just said, clearly Gorbad based those two barbarians on Tarasmar's character. Well, I'm not going to say that it wasn't a timely coincidence that we had a conversation about how Rend used to behave when I did put those NPCs in there. I'm just going to say that might have something to do with it. But anyway, guys, we've talked. I mean, we could go down memory lane for another 3 or 4 hours, but we're way past the normal length of our stream. So I'm going to open this up and let you guys ask some questions. Now, Tarasmar is not looking at chat right now. He's not in a position where he can see that. So you're going to ask the questions, and I will basically, put them to him. But we're going to move on to our final segment tonight, and we're going to try to keep it down to about 10 minutes. So, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. And as always,
viewer questions and answers.
As always, if you will, if you put @Howreroll at the beginning of your question, it's much more likely that I will see it, and it won't get lost in chat. So first question we have, it blank hit you, Barriga, it did that just because of how big the block of text was, but I can read it, so don't worry, I'll read it. Howreroll, can you, as a DM, tell if you're actually a good DM? For example, I personally think I'm mediocre at best. Oh, and Llama Eater, thank you for resubscribing. Give that man some love. Let's see. Let's go back out. I personally think I'm mediocre at best, especially since I mostly run published material, but my players repeatedly thank me and say they have a lot of fun, and that they enjoy the little bits of community theatre acting I throw in, which of course I think is something really cheesy and over the top. Okay, so to answer that question, and we got another donation from Virtual Tabletop Theatre. Let me go ahead and read that real quick, since as we're on Q&A. And we will continue after that, and I'll answer your question there, Barg. Preach on, Reverend. Thank you, dude. I think the first thing is this. Every group of players that you play with are different. What one group will like, another group may not. So if the group of players you are playing with are having fun and are enjoying the game, then obviously you're doing something right. How to quantify how good a DM is, how to quantify how good a player is, I don't know the answer to that. At the end of the day, you will feel yourself as you start getting. You'll look back in the past and realize how bad you were. You never really acknowledge how good you were. You'll start to acknowledge how bad you were, and as you become less bad, you'll notice that. I think those are really the things that I can say, as opposed to knowing whether or not you're a good DM. Oh, and Dave just lost the. Oh, he's coming back now, I think. We just lost video momentarily. There we go, he's back. So yeah, DB says, Howreroll, have you ever made your own race? Many times. We have made numerous races in the past, I know. Okay, Howreroll, Catherine Locke. Catherine is a published author. She writes a lot of Celtic fantasy. She asks, Tarazmar, any chance we might see you on stream playing with the gang sometime?
I would love to do that. Gorbad and I have tentatively discussed it. So yeah, absolutely, I wouldn't rule it out. It's I'm really impressed with how we roll, and I would love to be a part of it in the future if I can be.
Cool, there you go. So yeah, I think seeing Tarazmar playing on a one-off at some point is a very likely thing. Parkin Seal, Gorbad, have you ever had a HAL from 2001 Space Odyssey monotone voice to say, sorry Dave, I can't do that Dave, to Tarazmar? I don't think I've ever done that. I've spoken to him in a lot of different ways. I don't know if I've ever done that. Have you ever done a game within a game? My spacefaring players found a machine that simulated a fantasy world. Right now the characters have characters of their own. I've heard... That's one of those things that's been floating around a whole bunch. And here's my thought with that. Moochie Decat, thank you for the follow, Moochie Decat. I think my answer to that is that could be a novel, short, one-off adventure to break the monotony of a genre. Whether or not you would truly gain long-term enjoyment for that, I don't know. I've never done it. I can see it wouldn't be a terrible thing to do as a one-off. Rock Lobster says, I have two questions. First one is, let's see. The first is one I had yesterday, but I had no chance to ask. Do you ever repurpose existing campaigns, using a lot of parameters as a template to create your adventures, i.e. using a pre-existing dungeon layout, etc.? Never from group to group, but sometimes, or sorry, never within a group. But sometimes if I've done something with a previous group in the past, I may recycle it and use it, as long as I know that there is no resemblance of people in the current group from the past, if that makes any sense. In other words, yes, I'll use it if, for example, I know for sure that nobody current will have ever understood or know that it was ever used before. DG Dale says, hello Gore, hello Talismar, Hero chat. What's up, dude? Some of the subs did, this is like a time slot, so your subscriptions, if you are a subscriber and you're not on the auto renew, your subscription may have dropped off. That might be why. If you've lost ability to use emotes, that would be why. Second question is, in reference to earlier, how you handle how players allocate skill points. In your rules and parameters, how do wizards and sorcerers handle gaining new spells via new spell levels and spell slots? Do they actually have to look up the spells in order to learn them? Okay, wizards, absolutely. I do not allow a wizard to learn any spell that he has not come across and has had an opportunity to learn. Sorceresses are different, because they inherently manipulate and develop their power internally. They don't learn from books. So like Kealiana, I allow her to pick the spells that she wants, and we represent that as this is a manipulation of her own ability. A wizard, on the other hand, has to have the resources, has to have a spell book to copy the spells from, has to have a scroll to copy the spells from, has to be taught by another wizard. So absolutely, that is a mechanic that I definitely would use, Rock. I wouldn't allow a wizard just to pick up a spell. And in doing so, this is one of the things that a Dungeon Master can do to help limit certain broken spells from the game. You know, if you don't want your players to get their hands on a wish spell when they get to that level, don't give them an opportunity to get it. It's that simple. But don't allow them to say, I'm learning wish. You know, if you don't want them to have it, don't let them have it. Milk the Femtor says, Dear Tarazmar, a question we ask of all guests, and I can confirm they really do this. Boxer's brief or boxer briefs?
My signal's breaking up quite badly. I think 4,500 miles. It's taking its toll at the moment.
Right. Did you hear what I... can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. Milk wants to know, because we ask every guest this, boxers, briefs, or boxer briefs? Preference.
Oh, boxer briefs.
Boxer briefs. There you go, Milk. Inquiry minds wanted to know, now you know. You could have just said Commando, and then you'd have up the screen. Okay, Cavelock, Harold, do you ever have a character in Warhammer 40,000 encounter Xenos in non-combat situations? I have done. I haven't played a lot of Warhammer 40k here lately, but in previous experiences with Warhammer 40k we have done that. Okay, Catherine Locke has another question. Tarazmar, you talked about the difficulty playing non-human characters. With that in mind, do you have a favourite race that you like to play?
Dark Elf.
Dark Elf, there you go. One of the few people that I never had a problem playing a Dark Elf, because I know he won't be a complete tool and ruin the game.
Yeah, I think you really have to play an Underdark campaign. There is one, Dritz Erden. I don't think I don't think it works to have too many Dark Elves
that are
running
not
around.
evil.
So no, as an Underdark campaign, and we have done that in the past, it is my favourite. I love being just inherently evil.
I imagine that. Howreroll, does Roll20 support Pathfinder? Absolutely. Pathfinder is a great system. The biggest reason to play Pathfinder... I'll be honest, the reason we went 3.5 as opposed to Pathfinder is 3.5... we had a lot more readily available and transferable source material for the players to pick up and run. Pathfinder is wonderful if you're not the sort of DM to make your own world, and not everybody should, and you don't have time to write all your own material. Pathfinder is great just simply because it is so well supported, and Paizo put out a lot of product, so it's great for that. Have you ever created your own classes or adapted something from non-D&D games? Absolutely we have, numerous times. Any chance you would put the episode of Dialogues and Dice on YouTube? I only ask because they're on YouTube, dude. They are on YouTube. Dialogues and Dice episode 1 through 5 is currently on YouTube, and this will be on YouTube as well. It will be on YouTube. Varga, let's say you have a player that's great at role-playing their character, but said characters really affect group enjoyment. For example, the barbarian with no spells includes in a rather efficient-minded group. It's the responsibility, and Tarazmar chime in on this one, it's the responsibility of every player to make sure that the choices his characters make do not disrupt the game. We've said before, the one thing I hate hearing from any player is, well, that's what my character would do, when it clearly is a disruptive or a non-beneficial action. What your character does is what you choose your character to do. It is a choice made by a player. You can always choose to find a more useful or more game-friendly choice and not betray your character. So I think if the character in question is causing some damage to the group's enjoyment, it is the Dungeon Master's job to pull that character aside and pull the group aside separately. Talk to the group first and say, okay, what is it you don't like? Of course, he may already know. And then talk to that player and say, okay, so your character, whatever his name is, these things he does, it kind of doesn't really work in the game that we're playing or in the story that we're telling, so I'd like you to reel this back in or do it this way or do it that way. And communicate and talk to the player and, generally speaking, get them to understand what it is and find an alternate way to achieve it. Howreroll, have you ever had a I believe sorcerer create their own spell? It can be done. There's rules and mechanics for creating your own magic, for sure. Absolutely. What are your thoughts on there being a cost of the magic users for casting spells, as in premature aging, diminishing constitutions, etc.? I believe with powerful magical spells, they are absolutely viable. I know if you look, if a character depends on the edition you're playing as well, but like casting a wish spell used to age you in D&D. You used to age a year or 3 years for casting it. That was how you stopped players from using wish every 5 minutes. Certain magics should definitely, if they are extremely powerful, should definitely take a physical toll. And if you have a system, for example, we've played games where we haven't used a spell slot system, we've used mana point system. And when you're out of spells, you basically are physically fatigued and worn down, and you start being able to push yourself. Well, I'm out of mana points. Yeah, okay, I'm going to attempt to cast this spell, even though I know I really don't have the ability to do it. Okay, you can, but if you fail, or even if you succeed, this is the physical detriment that it's going to have on you for X number of, you know. So you can definitely include that as a mechanic that you can add to your own games, for sure. Have you ever had a player lose a character for a reason other than death, like imprisonment, or a fluke death like a teleportation failure? How do they react? Depends on how good the player is. A good player should always understand the risks of their actions and always be willing to accept them. Character death is an inevitability. Your characters die. That happens in Dungeons & Dragons. With no risk is no reward. If you have a dungeon master that artificially keeps your characters alive, you are missing a huge part of the enjoyment of the game, and that is the tension and the fear of the unknown. If you know that nothing you're going to do is ever going to kill you, what's the point? So you should always, as a player, you should always be willing to embrace your character's death with dignity. Doesn't mean you don't have to be upset about it. Doesn't mean you can't be internally mad about it. But you have to learn to accept it, because it does happen. I think that's one thing that all players have to come to grips with. And yes, I've had characters. I had a character draw from a deck of many things and pull the dungeon card and got teleported off into a trans-dimensional dungeon never to be seen again by a card, basically from drawing a card from a magical deck. He knew the risks when he drew from the deck of many things. He knew there were cards in there that were terrible, terrible cards, but there were also cards that yielded amazing rewards. He drew a card, he drew badly, end of story. He accepted it and moved on.
Absolutely. I mean, we've had party members that have died through stupidity, through their actions. Klaus Rassick is a good example. Died many times over and just didn't think it through. But then we've also had people that have died knowing the risks. And, you know, maybe 25, 30 years ago, we would have open die rolls because this is high stakes. You can choose to do that, but you know the risk. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. But that is what your character would do. And I think as long as you're true to your character, and I've lost characters and characters that have died, but if they've gone out the way they would have gone out, then I've got no remorse that way, because it's memorable that they went out that way.
Right.
It's
Baraga says he wanted to know your opinion on when we talked about the role playing and how a character might act in a certain way to cause detriment to the game. Wants to know your thought process and opinion on that.
I think ultimately you've got to know your character, and I think we touched on it earlier, that when you've spent an awful lot of time together during campaigns, you know the characters' warts and all. I'm not talking about the players, but you know the characters. So all of their quirks, when we talked about the Green Flash, sometimes we knew his bravado was going to get us into trouble. The way he would act would get us into trouble. But we also knew he was so pig-headed, as much as we told him not to, he'd do it anyway.
Right.
And so you just embrace it, and therefore it doesn't ruin your own enjoyment, because your character is living with this person on a daily basis and has got quite used to it. So
right.
You have to separate. You really do.
Exactly. Rock Lobster says, what are your opinions on spell regents, Howreroll and Talismar? Okay, even that question, I will say, depends on the group of players that I have. And honestly, the reason I homebrew so much stuff is because I play D&D differently with different players based on the level of experience that they have. For me, for the average game, if a spell component and region is readily available, I do not waste role-playing time and game time making my characters fumble around trying to find it. If you need 2 down feathers or whatever for a spell, I assume that the character has the insight the next time he sleeps in a room with a pillow, he's going to snatch a handful of feathers out and stuff them in his backpack. Later on, there is an item in the player's handbook that is actually like a spell pouch that is designed for that very purpose. It, quote-unquote, is the catch-all that contains all your basic components. Now, if there is a physical monetary value attached to the component, or if it is a difficult to acquire item, then absolutely I make the players acquire it. I have had games, however, where I make them acquire every single spell component, and I've made those spell components combust upon use, thus creating a very controlled and limited magic use game. While magic did exist in the game world, it was very, very considered a very valuable resource, because not only did you not have the spell slots, but when you run out of components, you couldn't recast it either. And it changed the entire way the game was played, because wizards and spellcasters suddenly seriously question every single casting of each spell. That was the next question. I embrace DM open roles, no pampering the PCs. You live with the consequences of your actions. Boucher BP, thanks for the follow. Virtual tabletop theater, I totally agree. For the majority of that, things. When do I fudge dice rolls? Again, totally depends. I play some games where I won't even use a Dungeon Master screen. I will. Every single dice roll is open. They are very real and very brutal games. There are other games with newer players that I will play where I will use a DM screen. And for example, if I happen to roll 2 20s in a row on a kobold fighting a level 2 warrior, and I'm like, oh crap, because of a dice roll, this character is going to die through no fault of his own. He's done everything right, but the dice have gone against him and they're with me. There are times when I would say, okay, instead of hitting for 10, he only hit for 6. Instead of hitting twice, he only hit once. There are times when I will fudge dice rolls to some degree. My golden rule, though, has always been, at any epic moment, the dice rolls are open. Any climactic moment, the dice rolls are open. And any time the character does something that is stupid, the dice rolls are open. I don't like characters dying just because I rolled well and they rolled bad. I understand this mechanic of the game, but I will allow that to happen under the right circumstances. But mundane, non-relevant circumstances, sometimes, with some groups of players, I will fudge dice rolls. Howreroll, have you done a campaign which has features no combat whatsoever, only dialogue, none? Yeah, we've played diceless roleplay. Where there are no dice, there are no mechanics, everything is roleplay. We have definitely done that in the past.
Yeah, we've also played many campaigns that we have role-played around combat. Right. So we've avoided combat purely by roleplay, and it has been just as enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I've always given, again, even in the early days when it wasn't really written this way, I always gave the experience points for defeating a monster based, or an encounter based on the outcome, not the death. Because I hated the fact that players used to see, in early days, used to see monsters as walking experience points. And only by killing them and doing damage to them. Because it used to be, if you kill this monster, it's worth X amount of experience points, and you get a bonus so much for every hit point of damage you personally did. Well, that promoted players to try to kill everything. And I realized that it was equally a beneficial experience to those people that chose to go around the combat, find an alternate way. You learn as much from avoiding the fight as you were in it. So we gave experience points in the same way for that.
Absolutely.
Alright guys, well we have got to go because it is crazy late. This is almost twice as long as we were planning on going. I only can say thank you so much for Tara's Mar, and I know he took the day off from work tomorrow just for you guys. Do you do have it off, right?
I've really enjoyed it, and we could talk for hours, and
right.
I just hope we haven't bored people. And I haven't meant to offend anybody, so I apologise if I have. It's been my opinion, and it's been a lot of reminiscing and talking. But when you've been playing for so many years, it's nice to know that someone else actually finds it interesting, because I've spent a lot of my life where you mentioned that you're a role player and people give you funny looks. So yeah, thank you very much for the invite. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, well, we've loved having you. I've definitely enjoyed catching up with you guys. I think chat has as well. And I think if one thing I can say about 5th edition, the biggest compliment I can say about the newest version of D&D and how Wizards have embraced it is they are finally starting to break Dungeons & Dragons out of the geek closet and become a little bit more openly acceptable by people now. Which is great, because it's a fantastic hobby. And I don't know anything else that any other game that you can play in the world that can give you as much enjoyment as D&D can. Unfortunately, a lot of people just never choose to experience it because of their stuffy mentality that they don't want to go to. I'm not a nerd, I'm not a geek. You know what? I am a geek. I am proud to admit I'm a geek.
Absolutely.
Play the crap out of any. If you put a game in front of me, I'll play it.
Yep.
So there we go. Alright guys, well thank you so much. We will not be here Thursday. Don't forget, there is no Thursday is Thanksgiving. There's no stream on Thursday. Hi there, I'm Gorbad. Welcome to the Orc's Nest. I'm the Dungeon Master here on Howreroll, and if you'd like to follow me personally, you can do so on Twitter at Gorbad. Check out thedmblog.com for all things Dungeon Master and Dungeons & Dragons related. And of course, you can follow me on twitch.tv/Gorbad. Also guys, don't forget to keep up with all things Howreroll. Follow us on Twitter at Howreroll. Check out the website www.howreroll.com, and make sure you follow us on YouTube as well. Cheers guys!
When I'm not playing Radovan Rainier, Cleric of St. Cuthbert for Howreroll, I'm just Shagget, a guy who can't do math in public. You can follow this poor lost soul on twitch.tv/Shagget, or on Twitter at @aneb_convos. For the love of all things boozy, stay in school.
I'm the Dragon Spooker, and I play Marlowe the Hot-Blooded Monk for Howreroll. You can catch my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/thedragonspooker, or you can follow me on Twitter at @dragonspooker. I hope to see you guys around.
Hi guys, thanks for watching today's episode of Howreroll. I hope you had a lot of fun, and if you'd like, you can give me a follow at Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook at Bane Blackstar, or come say hi in my own Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Bane1271. I stream full-time and usually play World of Warcraft, The Sims 4, and I even craft things out of polymer clay, but you never know what we'll get up to. I hope you'll come say hi, join in the conversation, and have some fun.
Hi, I'm Jane, and when I'm not fireballing innocent peasants, I'm perusing Twitter, eating ice cream, and petting my cat Norman. You can follow me on Twitch at Jane Ivana, and on Twitter at Jane on Twitch, and that's with a 0, not an L. Goodbye. Or as I say, peace, suckers.